everybody. My name is Ilana Earhart. I am the business librarian at Jackson County Library Services. I'm really excited that you're all here today to learn more about the grant writing process. And so there are some links in the chat. Just want to remind everybody that you can use those to keep information that you learned tonight, including the slides and a book list that will be very helpful in continued learning. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So the first thing that I'm sharing with you is the resource guide that I created for this workshop series. So you're going to see there are some of the links that I've shared earlier. There are links to the slides where you can see the recordings later on. And then you're also going to see down lower a list of further reading from the library and a glossary. So if there's anything that we talk about tonight that seems like a new phrase or a new concept, you can likely come through the glossary and find out what that means. Okay, so also feel free to use the chat. I will get to it between times when I'm presenting and answer your questions. And here we go. Okay, so introduction to grant writing part 2, impacts and outcomes, planning and partnerships. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is identifying a change gap, change versus activity, logic models, outcome statements. Then we'll have a little break, we'll have some activities to talk about, and we'll hop back in with how to find partners, partnership proposals, outcome statement, project timeline, and a final question answer and a couple of activities. Okay, and I want to remind you that there are library resources there to support you. So there are numerous books that will bring you through new understandings of all of the stakeholders in the grant writing and funding process, so that you can understand philanthropy a little bit better, you can understand funders and what to expect along the process, develop specific skills within the process. Also, Udemy is a really great resource for you. So Udemy is a place where you can go for self-paced learning, and you'll be able to choose what you want to learn. So whether it's soft skills, hard skills, you can most likely find what you're looking for there, including things like QuickBooks and leadership skills. So that is an awesome resource. I'm also happy to have appointments with anybody who has more questions, wants a little virtual tour around library resources. More than happy to make appointments with anybody who contacts me. Okay, so in the next session and the final session, we're also going to go over the Foundation Directory Online and how to use that. So you want to have a solid base of knowledge before you dive into the FDO. And you want to integrate your frameworks of grant writing into your organization's process before finding funders and contacting them. So that's why we're doing it in this order. So we'll talk about the FDO once we've got that foundation built. And again, your digital handout, your resource guide, go ahead and keep looking through that as we're talking. And also return to it between sessions. So take a minute to look over it, refer to this as we're talking. Remember that that glossary will help you out. And please write any questions you have in the chat box, so they will be answered during our Q&A. Okay, so the change you want to make. So have you identified a change gap? And what is a change gap? So in a lot of projects that people want to do for their communities, they're trying to address a problem or a systemic issue or something in the community that is not quite functioning or not well, and bring some resources there to fill that gap. So it's also seen as moving the dial in a positive direction. So do you know what resources are needed to fill the gap? Have you gotten together with your group or your organization to think about brainstorming sessions? What can you bring together with the resources you have access to? And what resources do you need that you don't have access to in order to fill that gap? Most individual projects cannot fill an entire gap. So, for example, if you have connected with organizations that want to bring food to people who do not have enough food in their homes, uh, there it's difficult to have one organization fill an entire community's need for food, but you can move the dial a little bit closer to having everybody get the food that they need. So we also want to identify what words you're using when you're communicating with people, whether that be in writing or in conversation. So what is an activity versus a change? So activities are the things that you do along the way toward a change that you want to make. The change is this overarching goal that you have to make a difference in a community. And the way that we talk about this is going to really help the communication process with anyone you're trying to convey this information to. So within activity, you have words like produce, create, establish, provide, develop, teach, assist, and collaborate. So those are all things that you can do along the way to making change, but they really are just those things that need to be done in order for change to happen. So the change words are reduce, remove, eliminate, decrease, increase, strengthen, shorten, expand. And you can see that these words are more relevant to a wider scope of change within your organization, in the community. So the scope is broader. So we're not just talking about errands that need to be run or any of the smaller things. We're talking about the wide scope things that will happen over the duration of the project as you are completing it. So what is a logic model? And why are we using them? Why does it matter in this context? So a logic model, as Patricia Montano has explained in Vantage Evaluation, is a tool and process to visually understand and clarify the relationships between actions and expected results of a program. So the things that you're doing should relate to the results that you want to see. And the logic model is going to help figure that out. It's going to bring visual organization to what are the resources that you have, and within each of those groups of resources, can you associate them with actions that need to be taken? And for those actions, we're going to move up a level higher and associate those with short-term outcomes. Those short-term outcomes should then be associated with long-term outcomes and impact. The thing that I would say is missing from this visual right now is your mission statement. So we want to stay centered on the mission of your organization. If you're just starting a group and maybe you need to look for fiscal sponsorship, you still need to have a guiding mission statement for what it is you want to accomplish in a community. So at the very top of that image should be your mission statement. How does all of this work relate to fulfilling the mission of your group or your organization through this project? So outcome statements. What outcomes do you expect to result from the project? Don't write in terms of opportunities or aspirations. So a lot of times, people who may, and organizations and groups who may not have written a grant before might be of a mind to say what they want to do, what they hope is going to happen, what they aspire to accomplish. And the funders aren't necessarily interested in that aspect. More so, stay concrete with numbers, service providers, timelines, communities served, and outcomes. So you can show what's been achieved in the past and how you will use some of those achievements and benchmarks to move forward in your current projects, and use the data and statistics that you already have that can prove that you have achieved the goals and made a difference in the communities that you serve in the past, and you will continue to do so. And you have plans for specific ways that that will happen. And you know to what extent you think that change is possible from your group or organization in the project that you are doing. Basic elements of a successful outcome statement. So you want to have some specific details in your outcome statement that will communicate that you know what you're planning, and you have a clear scope for what you plan to do. So you have a time frame, and you know what proportion of a community you want to make an impact on, or how much change needs to happen, but how much your organization can reasonably address. So what portion of what target group? And that would be basically your population. Again, try not to use the words target group or target population in your grant writing. You want to humanize the people you're serving. Use language that describes them as living, breathing people. So you also want to include change, increase, decrease, etc. That's where those keywords come in. What is your area of impact? What's the degree of impact? How far do you expect to move the dial during the time that you're implementing this project? What's everything being measured by? So what are the tools that you're using to measure the impact and measure the outcome? And when will the project or intervention be administered? So when you can come closer to answering these questions, then you're much closer to having a successful outcome statement. And it might take some collaborative discussions within your group or your organization to understand answers to all of these questions. So one example of an outcome statement that has all of that information included is, after 1 year of community tutoring, 75% of LGBTQ plus youth in this program will have increased job seeking and professional skills to current expectations as measured by WorkSource Rogue Valley employment readiness standards at the beginning and the end of the learning cohort. So this is something that doesn't exist, but I hope that that is something that could exist in this area at some point. Programs like this have existed in other areas in the past, and I believe there are some ongoing now. So outcomes measurement. Some outcomes may seem difficult to measure. So you may want to take into consideration that you'll need to use quantitative and qualitative information. So quantitative information is when you're counting, you've got numbers to identify how many, how much, all of that. Qualitative is when you're using anecdotal information or using quotes and using descriptions of an experience that someone has had to augment the data and the numbers. And how much can you reasonably evaluate? Not everything has to or needs to be evaluated, and it's up to your project leaders to identify what needs to be evaluated and counted and measured. So what are you doing and how? And this is a way to think about how are you going to integrate the ways that you're capturing that information into what you're already doing. Again, like we talked about last time, try not to duplicate and triplicate the work that needs to be done. If you can capture the data at the same time that services are being provided, do that. Your measurement information personalizes the project, so give it a face. Again, that qualitative and quantitative information should be working together. And how do you capture soft data? So those are your testimonials. They are your, maybe you have access to some uh, notes of gratitude from the people that you serve. Maybe you have some folks who you serve who would be more than happy to participate in a video about how they were served and how that changed their experience. And a few tips. So represent your intended outcomes accurately with grammatical sentences and appropriate change words. And also be really, really clear on what is actually going to happen in the project that you've planned. So we want to avoid situations that could arise if it's not clear what the impact is going to be on a specific population. So that's why you want to work closely with people in your organization, your partners, to try and figure out what is the likelihood of what's going to happen if we do certain things in this community in order to help them. So, for example, a past US government initiative to decrease welfare-dependent families by 2/3 was carried out through a rollout of more restrictive requirements, not by helping families. So effectively, their requirements eliminated people from the program who still needed help. And that's really not what we want to be doing with our projects and our community service. Like, find ways to make sure that the impact that you want to make is the most likely thing that's going to happen. Okay, so let's get into question and answer. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing. And I'm going to take a look at the chat and see what's there. So does anybody have any questions about everything that we just went over? I'll wait just a couple minutes. Okay, I'm going to flip it a little bit and ask you, what is something new about what you just heard? Okay, do you have any recommended programs for building a logic model? So I would love if you could connect with me and I will find resources for you to begin building a logic model. So there are a ton of different titles that we have in the library about how to go through the grant writing process. I would be surprised if there's nothing in there that could guide you. So yeah, let's connect, and I will share my email address. There we go. Is the Udemy course accessible to us? Yes, so that is something that you have access to both in the library and remotely from home. What you want to do is go to jcls.org, click on research, then go to all databases, have your library card with you, click on the U in the alphabet, and you'll navigate your way in through that. So just to recap through the chat, you're going to go to jcls.org, research, all databases. Okay, so are there any additional questions? And as you're thinking, I'm going to ask you a question too. Is there something in addition to the logic model or anything else that, oh, cool. Prachi has found the resource, so that's very cool. Is there anything that's super new to you that you would like to talk about a little bit more? Okay. I am going to head over to our activities before we go on with the rest of the presentation. And so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. So I want to ask you a few questions that are not as open. These are more directed for you to continue your learning process. So who from your group or organization should be present for a brainstorming session to create a logic model? How do you think creating a logic model will help you write an outcome statement? And use the contact info sharing doc. I will email any information that you all have loaded into there to everybody who is present tonight, and I will also retire that document so that your information is safe. So, okay, let's go back into chat, and I can unmute anybody who wants to talk about any of these questions. So let's kind of talk through like who from your group or organization should be present for a brainstorming session. So let's get somebody to talk through that. Like, who do you think should be there? And go ahead and raise your hand, and I will unmute you. Okay, let's go into here. I see that, I believe it's Serena has her hand up. Yeah. Okay.
Hello.
Hello. So let's kind of work through the question. Who in your organization or in your group working on this project that you're committed to should be there if you're creating a logic model to see what resources and what actions should be taken?
So we did a strategic planning event a few years ago, and I think that bringing all of those stakeholders together is really kind of the key. If you can, you want to get, I mean, if your board members to be there, all of your executive staff, but you also want to get management from the direct service programs that you might have. And if you can bring in people who are like doing the work in the programs from day to day, I feel like that's really important as well. I feel like a lot of times development staff have this sort of disconnect from the work being done because they aren't spending time on the ground in the programs. And so being able to bridge that gap by inviting those people who have those experiences and that knowledge is a really wonderful way to kind of get a window into that and be able to represent it in a way that's going to make sense as you're building a logic model to see all of the different pieces play out.
Yeah, and I really like that you're bringing up the aspect of bring people in who might not be part of the organization. So we're talking about the scope of stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Like, they're going to be people who might be the people being served. They might be people on the board. They might be community leaders from other organizations. So, like, when you think about stakeholders, who is that for you?
I would think that it would be people who have an investment in seeing the same outcomes. Like we're both serving the same demographics of people, like recognizing that the those that we serve are existing within a matrix of different things that they may need additional help with. So if we're providing mental health services, they may also need access to housing services or help with transportation or job skill readiness. All of those different things kind of play into the work that we're doing every day. And like we try to do what we can to bring partners on board and support them in their efforts, because we're going to be supporting the same group of people by doing that.
Exactly. So it's really awesome to hear you kind of put all of those pieces together. And it sounds like you've been doing that work for a considerable amount of time. So it's awesome to be able to share that with the rest of the group. For folks who maybe are a little bit earlier in their process and they're not sure, you know, what is a stakeholder? How do I get them? Who should be on board? Like, this is a really great example of, like, the ways that you should be involving people. So thank you so very, very much for that. I also wonder, do you feel interested in trying out the second question? How do you think creating a logic model will help you write an outcome statement?
It's almost my impression is that it's almost like writing an outline for an essay. Like you can highlight all of the specific pieces that are going to lead to a more full document. Like you'll be able to keep track of what you talked about and the different pieces that play into that and lead to your ultimate goal of meeting the goal of your mission.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely is a really great visual guide. And and it's also a way to kind of put things into categories in a sense. So it may seem like there are all these things that are needed, there are all these people, there's just all this stuff that needs to be done. You can funnel that into categories so that it all makes more visual sense and you can explain it and describe it and share that in and outside of the organization as needed.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to building more concrete documents that I can see how it can be used in a lot of different ways.
Right on. Yeah. And I also want to include anybody else who wants to participate in these questions. So each organization has the potential to be quite different. So Serena's answers to these questions might be significantly different and also correct, uh, different from another organization. So that depends on the nature of the project. Uh, and I'm going to go back into attendees. If anybody else wants to raise their hand, I am more than happy to call on you. Um, so I see that there was some commentary going on in the chat. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, potential community partner organizations, yes, those would be stakeholders. And Bob also says the outcome can be made more simple by restating the problem. So yeah, you can think about it in that way. And he says within a logic model. Yeah, uh, because we don't want to be centered on the problem. You want to be centered on the solution and what you're going to do about it and the resources that are needed for that to happen. That's kind of a more a more proactive way to state how how your organization is going to help a community that funders are more likely to respond to. But yes, okay. So what I'm going to do is go on ahead and uh, open up sharing so that we can continue on the rest of our way. Okay, so questions to consider. So this is from The Only Grant Writing Book You'll Ever Need, and it is written by Ellen Karsh and Arlen Sue Fox. So these questions are examples of what you'll find in that book as a guide to help you interpret the all of the guidance that's available in that book. So for example, in most ways, writing a grant proposal is as straightforward as filling out an application for a credit card. Is that true or false? So I would say that's false. You really want to have that process that's integrated with your stakeholders in those conversations. So you're not just filling in the boxes, really. So number two, if a grant application doesn't say no abbreviations, use them as often as you want. They save space. No, false. You don't want to use abbreviations. We talked about this last time. And the reason being is you never know who you're necessarily talking to. You may have built a relationship with a funder, and maybe the person reviewing the grant applications isn't familiar with your alphabet soup from your organization, and that blocks them from seeing the value of the work that you're doing. So try not to use abbreviations. Make sure your grant proposal contains every statistic you have available, or they will, or you will be disqualified. So, nope, you don't want to overwhelm people with data they may not necessarily need. So you want to be judicious about the data that you include, and you choose that based on what information you're trying to convey. If the funder has additional questions, they will ask. Okay, so what you should know about partnerships. So groups still in the process of forming a 501c3 and developing projects can still seek fiscal partnerships to qualify for funding. So that's a really common way to get started, because oftentimes a group might not have the resources to become a fully fledged 501c3, but on their path to getting started, they can be sponsored and build toward that. And as they're building toward that, they can build their credibility, a history, show that they have positive impact in the intended ways that align with their mission. They can be building that story and that history as they move toward being a fully fledged 501c3. So use also unusual partnerships that stand out to grant makers. So just because an organization serves a different population or is intended to fulfill a different mission doesn't mean that maybe you don't use some of the same basic resources to get where you're going. So you could partner with someone, an organization that does something completely different, but uses some of the same resources that you can help each other out with. And that's going to stand out to a funder. Partnerships can provide resources that otherwise require money. And when you're showing that your partnership with other organizations is helping you get the resources needed, that shows your commitment to creatively solving problems and making sure that the funder knows that you are not completely leaning on them to fill all of the need for funding. You are actively making sure that this program will be successful. And that's a matter of sustainability that we'll talk about later on as well. So strategic partnering can increase the pool of grant makers. If you're partnering with other organizations, maybe they already have relationships with funders that you haven't met before, and you could potentially increase the number of funders who you're familiar with and have positive relationships with. Create long-term planned partnerships that existed before the request for proposals was published. So funders don't really want to see that you are scrambling for partnerships to show that you are involved in community building and making sure that you're creatively getting the resources needed for projects. They want to know that you've been committed to doing those things long before you ever knew about this funder, if possible. And you also want to make sure that you're showing your development toward that end. If you are just learning about a funder and your organization is just starting. So as you're building toward serving a community, show that you're building partnerships that are going to make your work sustainable. And there are many different types of partnerships. And it's not necessary to try and always work toward a full collaboration, because even in human relationships, we need different types of relationships to keep us going. So in the case of an organization, you'll see the benefit of having collaboration, cooperation, joint action, coalition, shared resources and facilities, coordinated programs, shared information, networking, and working independently. So anywhere at the bottom all the way to the top of those types of partnerships are completely useful and necessary. So how do you develop your partnership proposals? You want to think about who is going to do the writing. Be very clear about who is going to be doing the writing that will be submitted and will be used in order to communicate, so that you have consistency. So who will be the fiscal agent? If you're working on a project together with a partner in your community, then make sure it's very clear who is taking care of the financial aspects. And that includes reporting. So who is taking care of the budgeting, making sure that you're on budget and reporting how money was spent. How do you show partnership in the budget? So we'll go over that as well. There are specific ways that you can include line items that describe what is being used, where it came from, and what your organization either paid for or benefited from through a partnership. And partnership management. So when or if you win a grant, first, definitely celebrate. It was a long process. You did a lot of work, and your organization deserves to, give one another a pat on the back, and then the work starts again. So thank the funder. Make sure that you are treating that relationship with a funder like a partnership in itself. They want to know that the funding that they sent out into the world is being used. The people who are using it are aware and responsible, and also showing gratitude. So plan a partner meeting. And in that meeting, you can talk about who's responsible for what and formalize those responsibilities and delegations. And again, formalize your partnerships. You want to document, review roles and responsibilities, review the timeline, create and document an operating structure, and set up accountability and reporting structure. These are all going to be huge parts of making sure that your program is successful in serving the community as intended. And your work plan will reflect the work that you and your partner organizations do together. So the major steps you will take to make the changes your project is designed to address. What are the practical ways you will get from the problem situation to where you want to be, or move the dial, depending on the nature of your project? Who has signed on to work with you as a partner? So in your work plan, you're going to need to describe all of the ways that your organization and its staff, as well as the partner organizations and their staff, are accountable and reporting for what it is that they are doing and contributing. So your work plan continued. Terms and common problems. So some terms that you're going to see for a work plan are implementation plan, action plan, operational plan, methods and methodology. And all of these mean the same thing. So just be ready that you might be seeing some different terminology depending on what it is, what application you're looking at from different funders. So things to look out for. So don't meander without reference to the intended outcomes. Do not, some things that you want to avoid also are not clearly connecting the work plan to the intended outcomes. Information is not in context and out of order. Too much or too little detail. Detail in the wrong place. Unclear how it all adds up. So all of this is going to lead someone reviewing your proposal from a foundation to feel a little confused and uncertain, and your proposal is more likely to be rejected if that confusion is happening. So steps to a successful work plan. So your work plan is a guide for completing your project. So don't meander through it. Brainstorm everything that needs to be done and then categorize. So again, that's where your logic model comes in, and your brainstorming sessions with your stakeholders and your organization, people directly involved with this project. Plan in context. Who is involved? What's involved? When is it going to happen? Where is it going to happen? And with what resources? So some of the different categories you might be thinking about in this process are planning, staffing, training, purchases, marketing, partners, evaluation, and anything else that comes into play for this project. So again, the logic model. So what work is reasonably achievable to make the change your project was designed for? Show how the work relates to intended outcomes and have creative, unusual partnerships involved in the process. So be very careful about your scope. It can be fairly easy for a funder to look through a proposal and see, oh, I think this much can't reasonably happen within the amount of time that they have designated for it to happen. And depending on the funder, they might have cause to have a conversation with you about that, or they might not. So it's really up to you to make sure that your scope is reasonable before you submit your proposal. So writing a partnership outcome statement. Here's an example of one outcome statement. Okay, by August 20th, the library will have commitments from at least 3 upcycle organizations to work with us as recruitment sources for program facilitation volunteers, as measured by signed letters of agreement from the organization's board of trustees. And you've got a few different things going on there. You've got the board of trustees is involved in making sure that things are documented and mutually understood. You've got signed, you've got that information recorded through signed letters, and the process is documented. So you also want to be thinking about MOUs, memorandums of understanding. So that can also be used in the process. Factors that help develop partnerships. So being an established 501c3 nonprofit with a clearly established brand is super helpful. Again, it's not necessary if you're still building toward that. So you could become a fiscally sponsored organization that is building toward that. Another thing to keep in mind that will help you develop partnerships is networking. Make sure that you are sharing resources wherever possible, formalizing those resources, connecting with people, seeing what other organizations need, and trying to help them fill those needs so that you can reciprocate. Create a handbook for partnerships. What is expected in a partnership? What is expected in a specific partnership between two organizations, for example? So also have a template partnership commitment letter. Have that already created so that when you need to duplicate, triplicate next, the next in the process, you can do that without having to recreate the wheel. You have that document already created. And have a service recipient or a testimonial. So developing partnerships also depends on gaining other organizations' trust, and they have an opportunity to trust you if you have those testimonials, you have record of how people are being served and how they've benefited from your services. And these resources and more can result from brainstorming. So again, that's communication within your organization and the stakeholders. And your outcome statement. So your vision of a positive future and how your work plan can get you closer to making a difference. So for example, by X date, 5 new volunteers will have completed training as program facilitators, as measured by participation records and scores on the practice facilitation review surveys that program administrators will complete. So this is another way to be very clear about what your vision is for what the outcome of your project will be. And your project timeline. So elements of your project timeline or work plan are your start date. When is this all beginning? When will it finish? What's the benchmark for it? Is there a strategy that you're going to use to make sure that your timeline is adhered to? What are all the activities that need to happen as your program progresses and your projects? And who is responsible for keeping all of this on track? Are there several people? Is there one person? Regardless, make sure that that is recorded and they are accountable for keeping everything on track. Typical ways to present your work plan. So you could present your work plan in a narrative, a bulleted list, modified chronological, so based on the activities that are going to happen, or based on a quarterly schedule with a bulleted list. So these are just some examples to visually organize what your work plan is going to look like in writing for your funders and anyone receiving this information. And again, we talked about in the first session how to make sure that information is not overwhelming in just block paragraphs. You want to break it up and make sure that someone could reasonably scan through it and understand what you're talking about. And some tips. Be aware of when you are using passive voice and keep your proposal as organized as possible. So some examples of passive are sentences that put the action and the thing being acted upon in the later part of the sentence. So the tree was moved by the man instead of the man moved the tree. Um, or let's see, another example is I was moved by the presentation. The presentation moved me. Those are different ways to format your sentences so that the action comes first and the subject follows shortly after, so that you know exactly what's happening as the sentence begins, and all of the descriptors come after. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and we're going to go into some question and answer. Okay, let's go ahead and use that chat and ask some questions. I am going to go into participants and see who's got their hands raised. I can unmute you if you would like to speak. And let's check out the chat. Is there anything that you would like to ask questions about within the information that was just shared? Is there anything that you hadn't heard about before? Okay, Lacey, let's go ahead and go into participants and unmute you. Here you go.
Hi, I have a question. So obviously there's kind of a theme of like adding testimonials into pieces of this. And for an organization like the CAC, we deal with a lot of, I mean, what we do is a lot of physical and sexual abuse on, people 0 through 18. And we don't really, that's not something we really do is like testimonials. Um, is there like another alternative that we could add in when we're writing?
So that sounds like an opportunity to connect with an organization that is similar to yours, because I understand fully the need to keep people's information secure and safe, and to make sure that your clients know that you are a trusted organization that they feel safe getting services from. And keeping their information confidential is going to be key to that. So yeah, I would connect with an organization that is similar to yours, that does something along the same lines.
Okay, but maybe it doesn't have to be for them, it doesn't have to be as confidential or Okay, I'll think through that. Thank you for the suggestion.
Yeah, and the reason you could maybe consider contacting an organization that does something similar is to see what their process is. How did they solve that problem? So you want to look at the different ways that you can engage a collegial connection with other organizations and share information and support one another. So you're asking a question could begin a connection that could be beneficial to both of you. Maybe they have a question for you later on.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, I'm going to go into participants and okay, so if anybody else wants to raise their hand and ask a question, I am more than happy to let you speak. Okay, then let's go into the chat, take a look there. Okay, Nicole says, separate topic and might just be me, but I don't think I'm able to add my info into the contact document. So I need to fix that. So you have the link, all of you, and I can make sure that it is editable. So keep that link, fill in your information after the program tonight, and I'll make sure that it is possible to put your information there. Okay. So let's go on ahead to some activities. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. So what partnerships can you think of for your projects? And share some changes you want to make with your projects. Also, share some activities that you are realizing cannot be listed as changes. So if you've had kind of a realization tonight that maybe something that you thought was a change is actually an activity, then that would be awesome to share too, because we're all learning together. So let me go ahead and stop share. And so does anybody want to go for the first question? What partnerships can you think of for your projects? So anybody who's still kind of in the process of identifying who to partner with and might be thinking of different ideas, if you want to share your thought process around that, we can talk through it. And go ahead and raise your hand if you do want to go through that. And otherwise, keep that question in mind to bring that back to your organization. Okay. So share some changes you want to make with your projects. So someone who hasn't necessarily had a chance to talk yet, do you want to talk through what it is your project is intended to do? Okay, it looks like we have partnered with Sanctuary One for outings for the children we serve to volunteer time out at their farm. It's wonderful. So that's awesome. From Serena. So that's one example of partnership. Does anybody else kind of want to share something that they're working on, or maybe working toward a partnership? Maybe you have an idea about someone you think could be a unique partnership that might attract attention. And there's also the option to think about that and bring that back to your organization. Okay. So let's go back into screen sharing. So some questions to consider. Is it a good idea to show funders that you relate to your, it is a good idea to show funders that you relate to your clients and program participants by using the words and phrases they use as much as possible throughout your proposal. So I would say, no, try not to do that. You want to give a clear representation of the people you're serving to humanize them. And you might include their language through testimonial, but you don't want to necessarily use the language that they use within the proposal that you're writing, because your proposal should be a genuine representation of how you want to serve the people your project is meant to reach. So if you are a published poet, it is perfectly acceptable to include some poetry in your grant proposal as long as it answers the question. And again, not so much. You want to be as clear and straightforward as possible. So your creativity is going to come out in the ways that you find to serve your population and the ways that you find to make partnerships. Here we go. And then a multiple choice. So grants are usually given to organizations that can demonstrate one of these things. So A, longevity of 5 years or more. B, continuity of leadership. Same leader for no less than 2 years. Creativity in juggling their mission statements. D, compelling need. So above all, your ability to communicate a compelling need is going to be the most important to funders. You really don't want to be juggling your mission statement around and trying to fit different things into it and change it around. Your mission statement should be a guiding statement that only changes as your organization changes over time. So just keep that in mind. You want to make sure that you are communicating the need and the services that you're going to provide and how you are filling a change gap. Okay, so if you would like to, you're more than welcome to share some ideas that you learned today and some main takeaways that you're going to continue working on and coming back to as you go through your process. And also, thank you. So I'll stop sharing, and if you want to share some of your takeaways, feel free to do that, and I will unmute you as requested. It looks like we have some stuff going on in the chat. So let's see. Okay, so Prachi is saying we are working on getting some funding for getting some integrative health clinic for from the government, health clinic funding from the government. Okay. So within that, I wonder what partnerships you're thinking about. Serena says, let's see. Okay, that sounds wonderful. I would love to learn more about what an integrative health clinic looks like. So that sounds like a connection that can be made soon. Okay, so some conversation going on. Okay, and alrighty, so it looks like there aren't really any questions for me in the chat, but if you would like to ask some additional questions, if you would like me to repost my email address, any of that, let me know. And if somebody does have a main takeaway that they want to share, I'll give a few seconds for someone to kind of mull that over and offer something up to the group. Okay, so as we're waiting, what I'm gonna do really quick here is go ahead and make sure that everybody has access to the Google Doc before we head out. So I'm going to change the sharing of the contact information doc. Okay. There we go. Going into sharing. Okay, let's change that from view to edit. Okay, you can load your information in there now. Okay. So I'm going to hop back in and see if there's anything in the chat. Okay. So with that done, I will encourage you all to fill out your information into that contact information doc. And I'll share that via email. so that that doc can be retired and your information will be secure. Let's see, Lacey says also, oh yeah, of course, Nicole. Being more collaborative within the greater team for projects and making sure the folks who are indirect services and managing those programs have capacity to move a project forward. Yes, capacity is very important. So, okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and let you all go, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for the last second to last session. Enjoy your evening.